Hi, kids. All right, so we're going to finish up Unit 15 by discussing the early portion of our involvement in the Vietnam War. And so, one big question that people will normally ask about American involvement in the Vietnam War is, why did we do it? Why did we get ourselves involved? And then finally, why did we stay? When it became clear that the United States was not going to be able to achieve its objective of, keeping South Vietnam independent and democratic, et cetera, then why didn't we just pull out? Okay, why didn't we leave Vietnam? And so that will be the kind of the crux of the early part of our conversation. So the Vietnam War, at least until the Afghan War of the 21st century, was the longest war in American history. And it spans actually five presidencies because Harry Truman's presidency was involved in one as well. But so why do we get involved? Okay, well, there are basically three reasons. Okay, one, after World War II, the Truman administration had established the policy of containment. Okay, that the United States was going to do what it could to prevent the spread of communism. And so, you had the Berlin airlift, you had the Korean War, all right, and the Marshall Plan, all right, various attempts on the part of the United States to prevent the expansion of communism beyond its kind of original borders, all right, of the Soviet Union and its socialist republics. So there's that legacy of that policy. Second, Harry Truman was heavily criticized, all right, after China went communist, all right, in 1949, that he had lost China, okay, and that he hadn't done enough, and that Democrats were weak on communism, et cetera, et cetera. And so future presidents, went to school off that event, okay, and folks like Eisenhower and Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, they don't want to be perceived as weak on communism. And so we have to fight in Vietnam. If we were to just allow Vietnam to go communist, they would pay a political price for that, which they're not willing to do. And then finally, you have the Korean War itself. A lot of Americans saw very distinct parallels, okay, between the situation in Korea and the situation in Vietnam. You had an artificially divided nation, one half communist, one half democratic. And we had gone in, we had defended the South Koreans, and we kept South Korea as a country. All right, we achieved our objective. So why would we not be able to do the same thing in Vietnam? All right, and so this combination, all right, of beliefs is what gets us in and keeps us in. All right, now we make three as a nation, all right, and as a government, we make three major assumptions about the situation in Vietnam, all of which are wrong, okay, and are going to contribute to the issues that we have. All right, first is the domino theory. Okay, the federal government believed, okay, that if Vietnam became communist, then its neighboring nations would become communist as well. All right, we discussed communism like it was a disease, okay, that spread from one country to another. And so if Vietnam went communist, then Laos and Cambodia and Thailand and Malaysia, okay, with Indonesia would fall to communism as well. All right, that and the domino theory is wrong. Okay, that's not how this works. Okay, that's not how communism works. But we again treated it like it was a disease, and then if you didn't contain it, okay, it would just kind of spread indiscriminately to neighboring countries. All right. The second assumption we make is that Ho Chi Minh and the communist folks in Vietnam are the puppets of the Soviet Union and China or China, okay, whichever. That this was a communist takeover being spearheaded by the major communist nations of the world, the Soviet Union and China. That is, in fact, not what's going on. Okay, what's happening in Vietnam is a civil war. Okay, you have two competing factions in Vietnam who are trying to figure out what they want an independent Vietnam to look like. You have the communist vision, you have the democratic vision. All right. And so that's what this war is about, okay, between two groups inside Vietnam who are trying to figure out that what will, for the first time in 400 years, Vietnam is going to be independent. What is that going to actually look like? All right. Okay. And then the final assumption we make is that we would win this war easily. okay, that we had superior weapons technology. We were a developed nation. Vietnam was a developing nation. And so there was no way, they had no hope of beating us. All right. And so we just believed that, okay, that there was no way we could lose. Okay. But there are a number of issues, okay, that we don't truly understand until we're kind of knee deep in the conflict. One is that we viewed South Vietnam as our ally, and that in fact is not true. Okay, we believed we could count on them as an ally, and we could not. The folks living in South Vietnam, there are a couple of things going on. First of all, just because people lived in the southern portion of Vietnam does not mean that they supported the South Vietnamese government. All right, there were people who lived in South Vietnam who supported Ho Chi Minh and the government of North Vietnam, and vice versa. All right, if you asked a person in Vietnam, or who lived in South Vietnam in say 1965, what country are you from? They would most likely say Vietnam. Okay, the Vietnamese people did not see themselves as North Vietnamese or South Vietnamese. Okay, they saw themselves as Vietnamese, and so the idea that those living in South Vietnam not only supported the South Vietnamese government but also supported our presence, that's false. Okay, that isn't true. All right. Second, all right, a lot of folks living in South Vietnam viewed the leadership of the South Vietnamese government as being orchestrated by the United States. Okay, that we were the puppeteer. Okay, and that leaders like Neo Diem, okay, were only there because we had put them there. Okay, and there was some evidence to back that up. Okay, when Neo Diem, who was the leader of South Vietnam, ran for election, he won 98% of the vote, including winning more votes in Saigon than people who lived there. Okay, so clearly we had stuffed the ballot boxes. Okay, and so that's an issue. All right. Also, Ho Chi Minh and the North Vietnamese army are going to use a strategy against the United States that had really never been tried before. Okay, they were going to fight a war of attrition. Okay, Ho Chi Minh believed that the United States could not handle a long conflict. Okay, the North Vietnamese, okay, or the Vietnamese communists are they've been fighting for decades and decades and decades and decades for their independence. So they're already in it. Okay, they're in it for the long haul because they already have been. Um, they're fighting for freedom and independence. We're fighting for them not to be communist. Okay, so they're going to want it more than us. And so Ho Chi Minh's belief was that if the war dragged out, that we would eventually give up, which is exactly what happened. That he believed that if the war went on long enough, the American public support for it would drop. Okay, and then we would be forced to pull out, which is exactly what happened. Okay, so the North Vietnamese never are willing to engage the United States in a major confrontation in the war. It's all guerrilla warfare. Okay, where a very peaceful area of the country suddenly explodes into conflict. Okay, and then the guerrilla warriors disappear. Okay, all right, into the jungle. Okay, and frankly, the North Vietnamese never take the peace negotiation seriously because their strategy all along was to get the United States to just give up. Okay, and not okay by beating them on the battlefield, but by just wearing us out. All right. Okay. Um, the United States also understood that the chances of us winning this war were remote. Okay. You know, American military commanders believed that we only had about a 10% chance of actually winning the war outright. They said that the most likely outcome would be a stalemate. Okay, that we would be fighting the North Vietnamese, and we would fight and fight and fight and fight and fight. Okay, and neither side would win, which is exactly what happened. Okay, we were bogged down in a quagmire when this war had stalemated. All right, back in the mid 1960s, and we just kind of kept fighting and fighting and fighting. Okay, but no, neither side was really making up much ground. Okay, and so this is the situation we're going to find ourselves in. Okay, by the early 1960s. Okay, when John F. Kennedy becomes president. All right. So when JFK becomes president of the United States, America's major role in South Vietnam at the time in 1961 is we're providing training to the South Vietnamese Army. All right. The South Vietnamese Army was being trained by actually a new unit, okay, that John F. Kennedy had created, known as the Special Forces, also known as the Green Berets. All right, so their very first mission, okay, was in South Vietnam, and so there were only about 16,000 American soldiers in South Vietnam. But again, their role there was basically advisory; it wasn't to fight. But during Kennedy's, kind of almost 3 years as president, the presidency of South Vietnam's president, Ngo Diem, became increasingly problematic. Most Vietnamese people are Buddhists. That is their religion. Diem was a Catholic, and he actually was anti-Buddhist, and he began cracking down, okay, on protests of Buddhist monks who believed that Diem's policies were anti-Buddhist. And so, in protest of Diem's handling, okay, of the religious rights of Buddhist people in Vietnam, Buddhist monks set themselves on fire, all right, in protest of Diem's regime. And these were shocking images. These are some of the first images that Americans saw of what was going on in South Vietnam, where Buddhist monks literally dousing themselves with gasoline and setting themselves on fire in the streets of Saigon. Diem's wife, Mrs. Diem, said after these protests that the next time the Buddhist monks wanted to have a barbecue, that they should let her know and they would supply the gas. All right. So that's not a particularly good way of making friends, okay, in South Vietnam. All right. So there were very visible protests against the Diem regime. Also, Diem has been pocketing a lot of America's financial aid. Okay. One thing that's critical, okay, when you involve yourself in another country, okay, is to demonstrate to the folks living in that country, so in this case in South Vietnam, that they are better off because of your presence. You're making things better, okay, better jobs, cleaner water, cleaner air, okay, more technology, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so the United States was in addition to its military training, the United States was also providing enormous sums of money to try to improve the South Vietnamese economy. Well, Diem was pocketing that money. All right. So the money is actually not being spent on raising the standard of living or anything like that in South Vietnam. And so that's a huge problem. Okay. Because many South Vietnamese people look around and say, my life's not any better because the United States is here. So as a result, I think the United States should leave. Okay. And so one of the biggest effects, okay, of Diem not using this financial assistance for its stated purpose is that it creates increasing anti-American resistance in South Vietnam because many South Vietnamese people view the United States as the only reason why the war is still going on. All right. And so what you see is the development, okay, of a group of people known as the Viet Cong. All right. So the Viet Cong are citizens of South Vietnam who support North Vietnam. They support Ho Chi Minh and the North Vietnamese. So what was happening, okay, is that as Diem's regime was essentially stealing American aid and not passing it along to the peasantry of South Vietnam, okay, the peasantry of South Vietnam grew increasingly unhappy, okay, and by the early 1960s, 80% of South Vietnamese rural communities, okay, had a Viet Cong presence, okay, and so the United States is now fighting two different armies. Essentially, we're fighting the North Vietnamese army, but we're also fighting the Viet Cong. Okay, so we're fighting the opponent, but we're also fighting people inside South Vietnam who no longer support our presence. All right. So as we enter into the fall of 1963, it becomes clear that Diem's regime is not sustainable, okay, that he's causing more problems than he's solving. And so the United States supported a coup to overthrow him. And the coup actually led to Diem's assassination. All right. And so he is removed from power. And then, of course, just a few weeks later, John F. Kennedy is assassinated, okay, which means that Vietnam is now Lyndon Johnson's problem. Okay. So in 1964, when Johnson ran for election to a full term as president, Vietnam was not a big issue. In the kind of few times that it came up, he just simply mentioned that the United States would maintain its support for South Vietnam, okay, and that it just kind of dismissed it as any kind of major issue, okay, that we would continue and maintain our support and continue our support, but we would not escalate our support. Okay, the problem with that is that Johnson knew that to be untrue. All right, and the reason he knew that was because the United States, in fact, was escalating its involvement in the Vietnam War, and here's how. So, in August of 1964, okay, an American patrol boat, okay, is spying on the North Vietnamese in the Gulf of Tonkin, which is right here. You can see the little red explosion mark. All right, so this American patrol was caught spying on the North Vietnamese by a couple of North Vietnamese patrol boats, and so they fired on the American ship. Okay, now there was no damage, nobody died, nothing like that, no injuries. Okay, but when Lyndon Johnson is told of this, okay, he goes to Congress, all right, and he alerts them, okay, that American forces, okay, in that were kind of been in North Vietnamese territory were attacked by the North Vietnamese, okay, and leaves out the whole illegal spying part. All right. And so Congress decides, okay, that the president should have greater latitude when it comes to fighting the war and prosecuting the Vietnam War. And so they pass what's known as the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. Okay. And this resolution says that the president, quote, may take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression. Okay. What this essentially does, okay, is this gives Lyndon Johnson a blank check to fight the Vietnam War however he wants. All right. And so the effects are going to be rather clear. Okay. So Johnson is going to begin sending additional American troops to Vietnam because the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution allows him to do that. All right. So in November of 1963, we only had about 16,000 troops in Vietnam. All right. 2 years later, we have over 10 times that. All right. And then by almost the end of Johnson's presidency in December of 1968, we have over 500,000 troops in Vietnam. All right. The United States also escalates its bombing, okay, campaigns in Vietnam. We had an air force, the North Vietnamese did not. Okay, so bombing we thought was an effective way of trying to, destroy the enemy. By 1967, the United States had dropped more tonnage of bombs on Vietnam than had ever been dropped on any country in any war ever in the history of the world combined. All right, and so we're just annihilating, okay, North Vietnam. And this is the first war that's being fought on television. All right. And so Americans are seeing this. Okay. There were no restrictions on the coverage. Okay. And so Americans are sitting at home. Okay. And they're watching the Vietnam War live and in color every night on television. And they're shocked at what they see. Okay. Because there's no filter like there had been with World War II, where the government censored the coverage of the war. So people didn't see dead bodies and all that injuries and all that kind of stuff. They didn't see any of that. Well, in the Vietnam War, people saw everything. Okay. And people were stunned. Okay. At what war was actually like. But all of that being said, okay, as we enter into 1968, a clear majority of Americans support our presence, okay, in Vietnam, all right, because again, America goes to war, we win war, that's what we do, all right, and so most Americans just kind of blindly believe that that's what would continue to occur, all right, and this is, of course, until the Tet Offensive in January of 1968, all right, so for months, the Johnson administration had been telling the American people that there was, quote, light at the end of the tunnel, okay, that the Vietnam War was going to be coming to a conclusion soon, that the North Vietnamese were on the verge of defeat. And this was a continued mantra of the Johnson administration. Well, at the beginning of 1968, each year, the North Vietnamese and South Vietnamese would agree to a temporary ceasefire so that they could honor the Vietnamese New Year, Tet. Okay, and so in January of '68, during the ceasefire so that both sides could celebrate the New Year, the North Vietnamese launch a full-scale attack against South Vietnam. Okay, and this is one of the first times they've ever done this. Okay, and while these attacks eventually fail, all right, we are caught completely off guard. All right. And so the United States it has to evacuate its embassy in Saigon temporarily, okay, because it's being overrun by North Vietnamese troops and Viet Cong troops. Okay. And this just okay, and you can see all the little blue explosion marks, okay, on the map. These are all the places that the North Vietnamese attacked during the Tet Offensive. And so this was just even though it failed, okay, it demonstrated that the North Vietnamese were not anywhere close to being defeated, okay? And so many Americans, as they are watching the Tet Offensive, are saying that as well. They're like, we thought this war was almost over. You said that the North Vietnamese were almost defeated. If that were true, then how could they do something like this? Okay, how could they launch such a full scale attack against our forces, and how could it be so effective, even if only temporarily? All right, and so what happens is many Americans begin to see a credibility gap between the Johnson administration, all right, and reality. Okay, and essentially they come to the conclusion that Johnson has been lying. Okay, about the war. All right. Okay. And so again, the impact of television on this war cannot be overstated. Um, Americans are seeing images of torture every day. Napalm attacks, okay, where this is a photograph of children, the Vietnamese children running out of a village that was accidentally attacked by the United States with napalm, which is an herbicide, okay, but it will also burn off human skin if it comes into contact with it. And so these children have been accidentally napalmed. All right. Of public executions. Okay, here's the police chief of Saigon executing a member of the Viet Cong who had just murdered other members of the Saigon police force. But again, people saw these things and they were shocked by it. Okay, the My Lai massacre. Okay, where American troops went into a rural community. Under the belief that it was a Viet Cong stronghold, and when they got there, the only people there were women and children, and so but the soldiers killed them all anyway. All right, and so Americans were horrified by that. And so this is, all of these things in combination are just reducing American support, okay, for our role in Vietnam. And then, of course, the Tet Offensive has just an unbelievable effect, all right, as many Americans come to the realization that we very well may not win this war, okay? And so as we move over to Unit 16, we're going to talk about how we eventually get ourselves out of the Vietnam War. And we'll see you then.